Hi, welcome to the Homeschool Moms Conference. I'm Katie Glennon, and my workshop is Developing Language Skills in Your Learner. Just to let you know a little bit about me and who I am, I'm a homeschool mom of 15 years. My boys are both now in college, and I have one graduating this spring. And I have an education background that consists of a little over 30 years. I have taught in different types of classrooms, in different school settings, as well as online classes, homeschool co-op classes, tutoring, and I've traveled across the Southeast training teachers in their classrooms and using different techniques in teaching with their students. I also have degrees in English and secondary education. So my website, Katie's Homeschool Cottage, I share all of that with helpful tips and ideas and resources to help you in your homeschool journey and help maybe take some of that stress off of you so that you can enjoy it a little bit more. I've also just recently started a podcast called Literary Cafe Podcast with the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network, and I hope that you'll come visit my website, click on my podcast link, and come visit me there, where monthly I share language arts topics and how to teach with practical fun ideas different areas of the language arts for all age levels, all the little young ones all the way through high school. So please be sure to stop by my website and my podcast for some ideas that will help you. I also have some handouts I want you to make sure that you download that go along with this workshop, and it has book titles and activity ideas to help develop language skills in your learner. I also contributed a literary study toolkit, so if you've got children in middle school and high school or upcoming middle schoolers and high schoolers, you might be interested in looking at that. It's in the Homeschool Conference swag bag with all sorts of goodies that you received as part of this conference. So be on the lookout for that literary study toolkit too. So let's get started. Now, when we talk about learning how to read or teaching our children how to learn how to read or write, that tends to get us a little bit nervous and a little bit on the stressed out side. So the idea of this workshop is to give you some practical ideas in starting from when your child is even as young as an infant, all the way through the beginning and to the middle of the writing stages. And it's a more relaxed type approach, but it does give you some fun activities to do and some starting points to get off on a good jumping point before you get into a formal phonics program, which is what I generally recommend, is the use of phonics, not just total sight words. And we'll get into that. So you'll have different learners. You'll have learners who show absolutely no interest in learning the alphabet, like I did. I had a learner who did not even want to know that the alphabet existed. And that continued even through when he was 6 and 7 years old. Then you'll have another learner who wants to know how to read and is going to encounter different kinds of struggles for different various reasons. And then you'll want to see if you need to get your learner tested by around 7 or 8. And you might want to also take a look at dianecraft.org. Her website is filled with articles and tips and resources to use if you find that your child is having some learning struggles. I have used a number of her resources, and I'm only recommending them because I've used them and I have found them very effective with my child. I used her brain integration therapy manual, which is excellent. And just a tip, if you have little ones who are starting to learn how to crawl, or for the future, you'll want to keep in mind something that was just coming out in a scientific study as my guys were a little bit too old. And I wish I had known this when they were little crawlers, but you want to have the stage where your child does not go from the belly type crawl or sitting to just standing and walking, which is what I had with one of my children. You want to make sure they go through that cross crawl stage where they're moving their arms on one side of their body with their legs and knees and then switching so that they've got that crawling motion. Because without that, there is something lacking in the ability to transfer messages from one side to the brain to the other, and it could cause some language challenges. So you need that cross-crawl development stage. And if your child skipped that and you find that they're having those language challenges, you'll want to check out Diane Kraft's brain integration therapy, because in there you're doing a lot of that motion, and there are different exercises to get that brain transferring those messages back and forth across the midline of the brain. And believe me, that does help. So take a look at that if you have a child who's experiencing those kinds of things. So without further ado, let's talk about how do we develop those language skills. One of the first things that we do, and we follow the oral storytelling tradition, is when we pass stories down from generation to generation, we have always told stories that have some sort of rhyme, rhythm, and repetition. And this is because it's easier for the storyteller to remember and to tell the story, because it keeps us on track and helps us remember. And also for the reader the listener to hear it and then being able to retell the story. The same thing in our reading. If we have rhyme, rhythm, and repetition, that helps develop our language skills and our reading skills. So the first thing that we usually do, and I have a coffee table full of books here that I'm going to share with you and show you how to do different activities with these items. The first thing that we usually do is we read Mother Goose nursery rhymes, or we recite nursery rhymes, or we tell some sort of stories, or the songs with the finger motions, like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or Itsy Bitsy Little Spider. And those are some of the very first things that we do with our young learners. And even with those, we're developing language skills. The next thing that we want to look at after that is the idea of letters of the alphabet. So we move from the different sing-song type chants that we learn in the nursery rhymes that we tell our little ones, to the idea that there are these things called letters. And we can get magnetic letters to put on the refrigerator so that they can touch them and manipulate them when they see them sitting there. We want to make sure that we include our auditory learners and our kinesthetic learners with the alphabet if we want to introduce the letters of the alphabet to them. Around 5, even younger than then, if your child shows an interest. And we can do that in a number of ways. We can do that through songs, like the alphabet song, or other songs that have to do with the letters of the alphabet. We can also include our kinesthetic learners. I had a child who I wasn't sure if he was auditory or if he was kinesthetic, because he was always moving and touching things. And so we did a number of things that included laying down on the floor and shaping the letters of the alphabet with our body, and doing a lot of arm motions and forming the letters with our whole arm when we weren't shaping them with our whole body. We also did a lot of out in the driveway, drawing letters of the alphabet with chalk or a paintbrush and a bucket full of water. We also, for touching and feeling and making the shapes of the letters, we cut out letters of the alphabet in out of sandpaper, and then we would trace those letters. We also traced them in sand. We had shaving cream on a cookie sheet and would make the shapes of the letters in the cookie sheet, in the shaving cream. We also did finger painting, and we didn't do just paints with the paintbrush, but we did finger painting because of the whole arm motion. We also made letters out of pipe cleaners and Play-Doh or salt dough. So we really experimented with letters in different types of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic manners. Another thing that we did was with books such as this one by Dr. Seuss, an ABC book where you have the repetition of the same kinds of phrases, and we were introducing the sounds of different letters, such as big A, little a, what begins with A, Aunt Annie's alligator, A. And then we might want to practice saying the letter sound, A, alligator, Aunt Annie. And then we would, as we say it, we would be pointing at the words and then maybe saying, oh, there's Aunt Annie, there's the alligator. Do you see the A? And so you could be talking about the book and making the sounds and talking about the sounds and the letter of the alphabet while you're reading the book with your learner. So that's another way to review the letters of the alphabet. Another thing that you could be working on at the same time is getting books that label things. So labeling and identifying the names of common objects. Now, this one in particular is a Dr. Seuss book called In a People House. There are also a lot of Richard Scarry series where Richard Scarry has tons of books where there's labeling, and then you point at the picture and then you say the word, and you can say the word while you point at the word. And a lot of times you're going to find your child maybe picking up your finger and deciding which picture they want you to point at, and pointing, using your finger, pointing at the picture, and then pointing at the word so that you're saying the word on command. So they get a kick out of kind of being in charge of reading books like this. And this is great practice for actually just vocabulary of common objects. Now, you might have a child who gets hooked on trains or trucks or certain types of dinosaurs, certain types of things, and they'll find a book about it at the library, and then you'll be reading that book over and over again. Which brings me to another point. You want to make sure that you read the same books over and over again, and your child will let you know which ones those should be, for at least 15 minutes per day, because they have found through scientific research that that is the minimum amount of time that you should be spending working with your kids, just enjoying books and reading books. It doesn't have to be a formal lesson or lecture, but at least 15 minutes a day. We also used to include at least 30 minutes a day in the evening. So we would read sometime during the day, 15 to 30 minutes, probably before nap time or before lunch or after lunch and then nap time. And then we would do another 30 minutes right before bed, after baths. And that was a time where they could pick out what books they wanted to read. And then I would introduce one or two new books, short books, at a time. Not only because we had read their books about 573 times, I wanted to have something new and interesting for me to read, just to kind of break up my routine a little bit, but then it was exposing them to something different as well. But I would always make sure to include their favorite books. Something else we included in our day that you might want to consider is a quiet time. If it's not nap time, then at least a quiet time where they stay on their bed, they can bring books with them, and they can sit or lay on their bed and quietly look at books by themselves. We also had an easy-to-use cassette player at one time, and then we moved into newer technology as they got older with a CD player, and then they could listen to just the story that's being told on the CD, or from a library, we would get maybe a book with a matching audio to go along with it, and then they could follow along in the book and listen to that. So we had a quiet time anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes per day in the middle of our day most of the time, and this is what they would do if they did not fall asleep. Most of the time, they would fall asleep listening to a story. Then at night, at bed, after our story time, they usually fell asleep at night listening to a story on a CD player or a tape player. Now, once you get into the idea of wanting to introduce your children to word families, and you're introducing them to a phonics program in their reading, during your reading time, you could go ahead and start working on word families. And when I say word families, I mean the rhyming words, like hop on pop. So the word family is op. And then again, as you read, you would be pointing at the words as you say them, and they will be recognizing that, boy, these words sound alike. They won't necessarily say, oh, they rhyme, but they sound the same, or they sound alike. And again, so you'd be pointing at the picture, you'd be pointing at the words as you say them, and then you could point at the picture and say what's happening inside the book in the pictures. And a lot of times, they'll start taking over, either taking your finger and pointing at things, since you are becoming familiar with the book now, or they'll go ahead and start pointing on their own at things while you read. Now, they may not get it all, or correct all the time, 100% of the time, but it's close enough, and they're getting used to the idea that, you know, oh, she's reading what's on the page. She's not just making it up. So you want to go ahead and get them into the routine, too, of turning the pages. And they'll even want to maybe talk about it. So you might start asking them some questions. Oh, how many people do you see in the bed here? And then practice counting them together. What color is his hair? Red. So you'll start asking some simple questions along with maybe pointing out some things to begin with. And then as they get more familiar with the story, you can start asking some simple questions. So early learner Dr. Seuss books are good for word families, not the more complicated, longer stories yet. Okay. And then another series to consider is the Sheep in a Jeep or Sheep Go to Sleep, Sheep in a Shop type series, because again, it repeats different words and word families. And again, you would want to point at the words, the Jeep won't go, uh-oh, and then point at what's happening in the story. Oh, look at that. Look at all those sheep in that Jeep. And over here, here's a bird watching them. And then you could turn the page and continue. And then they'll probably come to the point and get so familiar with the story that they say, uh-oh, the Jeep won't go. So they'll start telling the story back to you. Now, they're not necessarily reading the words, but they have it memorized, but that is a beginning step in developing their language skills. Another series that I encourage you to look for, and you're probably very familiar with these, are the Eric Carle books where they have the rhyme, the rhythm, and the repetition. Not all of his books have this, but if you look for things like Polar Bear, what do you hear? Or Brown Bear, what do you see? You're going to have the repetition, you're going to have the rhythm, and you're going to have the rhyming. And after you have read this enough times, you can go ahead and practice stopping and letting them fill in the word. For instance, Polar Bear, what do you hear? I hear a lion roaring in my ear. And so then you may get to the point where they know the story well enough where you say, Polar Bear, what do you? And they'll fill in here. I hear a lion roaring in my, and let them fill in ear. So now they're remembering the word families and the rhyming words that fill in the blanks, and they're anticipating what it is that you're looking for and the answer. So this is a great exercise in letting them forecast what word is going to be filling in the blank, and recognizing that the two words that they fill in the blank rhyme. So you have Brown Bear as well to use for that kind of thing. Now, another kind of book that does this as well is something like this, which is kind of fun. It's not a classic, but I found this and I thought it was great. It's called What This Story Needs is a Pig in a Wig. And it has, again, the different word families. So it says, what this story needs is a pig in a wig. And again, you would be pointing the words out as you say them. And you could point at the picture and say, oh, isn't that funny? You've got a pig in a wig. On a boat, in a moat. And then they're going to want to know what a moat is. With a frog, a dog, and a goat on a log. So you can see you're introducing different word families again. So that's a different kind of rhyming with the word families. That's a little bit different than the Brown Bear. And then when you have children that are hooked on a topic, such as fire engines, which at one time my child was hooked on trucks, then you have ones that follow a theme, and then they also have rhymes at the end of each line, and you can have fun with them and stop and then let them fill in the missing word. That's a great exercise to do. Speaking of which, I found a neat book called We Both Read Riddle Rhymes. And again, this isn't like a story with rhyme, rhythm, and repetition, but it does give the child an opportunity, and this says it's for levels pre-K through K, where you're reading a rhyme and you're letting your child use their own experiences with vocabulary and sounds to fill in the blank. Now, it may take a few times for you to read this together to get them used to the idea, or even to like have it trigger what kind of answer or response you're looking for. But it's a fun exercise with word families and rhyming sounds. What can you wear on your head that rhymes with cat? And then if they think about what do they wear on their head, and you might have to prompt them a little bit in the beginning. They might come up with the answer, hat. And then it goes on with what has pillows and sheets and rhymes with red. So you can even ask them, what do you sleep in? And it sounds like red. And they might come up with the answer, bed. So I thought this was a really neat way to just practice and exercise the use of word families and rhyming sounds. Another thing that you want to do as your child gets more and more experienced with listening and comprehension, being able to answer questions about what's happening on the pages in the stories as you're reading them together, and they're prepared to listen to more difficult, complex, and longer stories, that's when you would want to go into the more complex stories for Dr. Seuss, such as Green Eggs and Ham. Now, it is supposed to be a beginner book, but I wouldn't start off with this kind of book. I would start off with more the Hop on Pop type book first, and then move to these longer ones, because this has a lot more happening on each page. Some are shorter, some are longer. And you want to, if you want to, you can read this for fun, obviously, but they may not have the attention span to make it through the entire book. That and Cat in the Hat, that tends to be a longer book as well, and that takes a little bit longer attention span. But it does have the rhyming sounds, not in a box, not with a fox, not in a house, not with a mouse. So it goes from starting with one word family, and it continues to more and more word families. So it might be a little bit too much at the beginning for really younger readers or learners, and you might want to wait until they've got that attention span so that they can keep up. Same thing with Dr. Seuss's Sleep Book. This is a great one too, but again, it has the longer sentences and more going on each page. Now, you also want to keep in mind that shorter could be better when you are starting with the reading skills. In the phonics programs, you usually have the little activity booklets where there might be just one short sentence on each page to help them practice. Well, that's great if you want to go ahead and have a more structured reading skill development time and make that part of your homeschool curriculum. But for fun time and to help practice some of these skills, you want to make it a little bit more fun. And then also you can break up the phonics program a little bit so it's not the same thing every time. And you can do that through the use of poetry. Poetry is a great way to develop language skills, and I have a whole list of different books that I recommend that have great children's rhymes that you can get started with. This is just one of them, the 20th Century Children's Poetry Treasury. And Jack Prelutsky is a great poet that had compiled not only just his poems, but a lot of other poems by poets. Now, some of these are longer, some of them are shorter, and you can just have fun just reading them to your child and having them get used to something different than just Dr. Seuss. Okay, and if you want to include poetry in part of your reading skill development, I'm grabbing something here to show you. You can type out a poem that is something simple, like this one. And I'm going to get a little bit closer so you can see what I did here. So this is 10 Brown Bears. And then again, this is by Jack Prelutsky. And I typed out the poem with text, plain text. And I found a text that resembles just printing, regular printing. Times New Roman has some of the funky looking letters like A and G. And it looks a little bit more fancy than what they would be used to seeing. So you type out the lines in the poem, and then you can have them practice with different colors. And I'm not sure if this shows out enough for you, but I circled the rhyming words from the same word families in the same color. And you can have your child practice doing this as well. And this is about maybe first grade, if your child's ready to do this. Otherwise, you can do it in second grade or, whatever suits your child. But look at as you have read the poem over and over again, and they get used to the idea of word families and rhyming sounds, they can practice circling the same rhyming sounds in the same color, and then switch colors when they come to a different rhyming sound or different rhyming word. And they have fun doing this with all different kinds of colors. And you can find some funky smelling different, pens that have different scents, or glitter pens or highlighters. So they have fun with that. The next step from that would be then to type out the poem, the same one that they have gotten used to with the rhyming words and the word families, and this time leave a blank and let them use creative spelling if they even have to, or inventive spelling, and let them write in the word that goes in the blank space. But as long as they have the same sound in their creative or inventive spelling, they are working on their word families and they are working on their phonetic skills. So that's why I recommend a phonetic-based program, is so that when it comes time to write, they have that phonetic background to help sound out words and put them on paper as they write. And so again, I wrote these words in the blanks, used different colors so that the colors would match the same sounds but be different than other sounds. And then when they're ready, you can move on to alternating sounds. So this poem is a little bit different because you have alternating sounds, and they're not just one after another. So they have to listen a little bit more carefully and make sure that they're listening for the same sound and that they're not just saying, oh, well, this one rhymes, so this is the next one, so that goes with that one. It doesn't. This time it's skipping. It's alternate rhyming sounds. And then you can move on to longer poems. And I love this one because Jack Paletsky has really fun poems. Be glad your nose is on your face. And then it's a funny poem about be glad your nose is on your face and not somewhere else on your body. So that's, as your child gets older, they're going to enjoy longer poems. Now, as they learn to read, poems are great practice. Instead of an entire book that may intimidate them, even if the book has just one sentence at a time on each page, it's longer. If they can develop fluency in a less intimidating way, if they are familiar with reading and listening to the same poem over and over again, and poems are shorter, so it makes it less intimidating for them to read something shorter. And then when they're done, they can feel like they've really accomplished something because they've finished reading that poem over and over again. Something to go along with learning the word families and also sight words. Sight words to go along with the phonetic program that you use with word families. I would recommend a website such as sightwords.com, and that uses the Dolch sight word list, and they have a separate list for each grade level. You would use each list at a time and get your child familiar with those words at a time before moving on to the next list. They also have tons of great activities to do with helping your child learn those sight words. An activity, for an example, for word families, and especially if you have a right brain learner, they have a tendency to be able to learn things better if it is associated with pictures or stories. So for letters of the alphabet, you might have seen letters that have animals maybe transposed inside those letters. So that's kind of like almost a story that they can associate with that letter if they can visualize that letter with a picture that's been superimposed inside that letter. Same thing with word families. So here I have bat, but the word family that we're concentrating on is at. And as I change the beginning letter in front of the word family, I keep the word family in one color, and then I can put the beginning sound in another color. So this sticks out in their mind that, oh, that's the word family. The word family's at. And then the same thing with sight words. If they're having a difficult time, for instance, looking at sight words and remembering what that sight word says and saying it, you could go ahead and put the part that they're having a more difficult time. Let's say they know the L sound, they know the K sound, but they're having a hard time with that sound. So you would put the sound in a different color. So whatever part of the word they're having problems with, you would put that in a separate color and have them practice just that part of the sound, so that when they do see it on a flashcard like this, then they're like, oh, that's the one. And their memory will be triggered to say, ooh, it says. So look. what I do or did was I would write 2 of the same sight words and 2 of the same words with the word family. So I have 2 cats, I would have 2 looks, I would have 2 mats, 2 bats, whatever words we were practicing, and I would make them into pairs. And then we would play games, such as card games like Go Fish, Old Maid, Memory, where it's like a memory concentration game, and we would lay it out facing down and be able to pick pairs. And before they could keep the pair in the card game or the memory game, they would have to be able to read the word for me. And then I would give them the matching pair they were asking for in Old Maid or Go Fish. Or they would have to read it before they could keep the pair that they found in the concentration or the memory game. So that's a good, fun way to review things. And if you go to that website, like I said, for the sight words, you'll find more. Now, when you move from the actual reading and then starting to write the words and fill in the blanks for like the poetry, a fun thing to do to help them get started with writing their first sentence is having paper like this, where at the top they would go ahead and draw a picture and then write a sentence, just one sentence, about what it is that they drew. And before you even get to this part, if you have a younger learner and they draw a picture, they can tell you what the sentence is that tells about the picture. And then you can write that one sentence down. And as they say each word, you write the word down. And of course, you can tell them that that's what you're doing. Tell me what this picture is. Tell me one sentence that tells me what's in this picture. And so then you would write it down as they are speaking. Then as they get older, then you would have them start to write, drawing a picture. And the picture can be about a story that you've read together. So there might be a scene and then that they especially liked, and then they could go ahead and draw the picture of the scene of a story that you've read together, and then they could tell you the sentence about it. Or if they're first grade, they can start writing their own sentence about what's in that picture. And again, creative or inventive spelling, using those phonic abilities that they've been learning about with how the words sound, what sound does each letter make, and they can sound out the word and spell it as it sounds as they write the one sentence. So you'll start off with one sentence about what they've drawn, and then you'll slowly build up to where they can write 2 sentences about what they've drawn. And to give you an example, we did a lot of notebooking pages, and this was my son, and this is actually the beginning of 2nd grade, and we were reading about, we were doing the Story of the World series, and we were reading the first volume of that, and it was about ancient Egypt and ancient cultures, and this was Sumer, and he wrote a sentence, just one sentence here, and drew a picture, and wrote about what that picture meant. And then another day, he drew another picture and wrote a sentence about what that picture was about. And this was at the beginning of the year. And then at the end, by the end of the year, he got so used to doing this kind of thing that he was able to go from this kind of page with multiple sentences to where if there was a topic that he really enjoyed, and for some reason he really enjoyed the Persian War, he just kept going. He wrote this page, and then he went on to the next page, and then even to the back of that page, and he kept going. So this type of technique in getting them just used to hearing sounds, then being able to read those sounds because they're connected together with those word families, and then being able to phonetically spell them out with the inventive or creative spelling, just one sentence at a time, and then building slowly up to adding 2 sentences and then 3 sentences, and connecting it to a story where they're retelling a story instead of having to kind of make something up. That's a lot easier for them. So if you have them start out with reading a story together with you, drawing a picture about what happened in that story, and then writing a sentence about what happened in that story, This way there's less for them to think about and they're just retelling something. Worry about proper spelling separately. I know this kind of goes against the whole Charlotte Mason thing, which I really enjoy, but I have found that the most effective way to get them to write without having this deer caught in headlights kind of thing is to allow them to have that inventive, creative spelling, let them draw on their experience with the phonics and sounding out words. You can do copy work and have them copy words for their handwriting and for spelling separately, but this actually helps them just not be so intimidated about writing. So I hope that these tips and activities help you get some ideas in developing language arts skills with your children, language skills with your children naturally. Please come by and drop me a message if you have any kinds of questions. I know that there is going to be some forum opportunities with the homeschool conference on Facebook or in other types of discussions, so feel free to tag me in those. Also, come by my website and write any comments or questions that you might have there. I also have a Developing Language Skills in Early Learners freebie on my website if you want to sign up to receive that as well, and then you'll be on my mailing list where I try to share more of these types of practical and helpful suggestions. So I hope that you got a lot out of this, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the homeschool conference. Have a great day.